Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get to process, because if we were going to go through each one of these and debate the relative merits, Comptroller, we would be here all day. And so I want to talk about why we have these hearings, and then everybody retreats, goes back to their agency, goes back to what they do, and then we come a year later and have another discussion. So I want to ask about ongoing supervision and get to the heart of what you were talking about earlier, which is, agency heads change, administrators change, and then you're back in the game again trying to educate or re-educate on why these recommendations were necessary. What if, let's just presuppose that every time something like this was done, we had a sit-down, we had a strategic plan put together, timelined, with accountability measures that everybody agreed to and said, yes, we're going to do it, taking a look at, I think earlier Senator McCaskill talked about return on investment, low-hanging fruit, prioritizing those things that actually give us the biggest bang for the buck, and then periodically actually getting reports on whether we're meeting those requirements, because so that this process becomes institutionalized between the Congress and the agencies and GAO.
I think that'd be an excellent idea, and I'd be happy to participate.
I think it'd be an excellent idea, but I have a tendency to fall in love with my ideas, so I just need I need people to argue against me frequently. But
well, I won't argue on this one.
I think that's the level of frustration that we all have here.
Well,
which is,
I have the same frustration. I try to do what I can, working with the agencies and the Congress, but we need more concentrated focus on this. I mean, our financial condition is not sustainable over a long period of time, and we're wasting too much money on these inadequate processes and procedures. So whatever process that you can convince your colleagues to do, I'll participate in.
Well, it does seem to me that that would be a critical kind of component of follow-up, because the great work that you do in actually going out there and identifying these problems, identifying the areas of concern, if we don't have a systematic process piece to go behind it, we really are only talking to each other and wringing our hands and decrying the waste of federal dollars instead of actually fixing the problem.
Yeah, a good model is what we've been doing with DHS. For example, when I first met with them, as the Deputy Secretary, they said they really didn't know what to do to get off the high-risk list. So I sent them a 29-page letter and specified all the things that they needed to do to get off the list. But to their credit, they said, okay, we understand now, we agree. They put a corrective action plan together. That plan has withstood changes in political leadership over at DHS. I meet with the current deputy, and they're making good, steady progress to that area. We've informed the Congress of these matters, and Congress has given some attention. So most of this stuff, except maybe for NASA, is not rocket science, and it just requires disciplined follow-up.
Well, and it requires some continual oversight that's not sporadic, that is meaningful. And I think that's, to the extent that you guys need us to play bad cop, we're way willing to do that. So we'll work on a discussion, I think, going back and forth on what that process could be. I want to just, in the time that I have left, talk about the IRS and talk about kind of this systemic, what seems to be a systemic failure to institutionalize processes that would prevent fraud. And I want to start out by saying, obviously, if someone has a W-2 in their hand, there's a W-4 somewhere that's been filed with someone relaying this information. But this information, according to Social Security dollar amounts, is relayed every time there's a payroll, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Jim, do you know? This is Jim White, who's our tax expert.
Some comes in throughout the year, but the information that IRS needs to match, they don't have all of that information until after April 15th.
But Social Security has it. When is the W-4 due to Social Security?
It depends on whether it's paper or electronic, but it's due either February or March.
Give me the date, though.
Well, some of them are due at the end of February, some are due at the end of March.
So the employer can't have prepared W-2s, but transmittal of those W-2s to Social Security does not occur until the end of February.
Correct. And part of the reason for that is there does need to be a window in there for employers to correct errors. So they give it to the employees. Sometimes the employees go back. There are errors there that need to be corrected. Social Security also has a error correction process, and then those go to IRS. The other problem is IRS does not have the information systems, the computer systems that would allow them to do real-time matching. So that would be another part of this. If the forms came in earlier, IRS would need improved computer systems to be able to match real time to taxpayers' tax returns.
It's really hard for those of us who deal with the complexities of Amazon.com to really believe that in this day and age, they don't have real-time matching capability. And so that's something, obviously, that needs to be funded if we're going to be serious about fraud detection. I want to get to the identity theft, because none of this would really solve the problem of someone seizing that Social Security number, filing a fraudulent return. And what would be a way that we could prevent that if, in fact, the real taxpayer doesn't file until April 15th?
Well, you're right. The crooks file early. They need to beat the honest taxpayer's tax return, so they file early. When the honest taxpayer files, IRS at that point discovers they've got duplicate returns and they know they've got a problem, but they don't find out until after they've issued the refund to the crook. And at that point, then they're trying to chase the money. So the solutions, the pre-refund matching, getting the W-2s in time to match to taxpayers' tax returns before refunds are issued would put a big dent in the fraud. It's not the only solution. Another solution—
That I don't understand, and I'm obviously out of time, but you know, if somebody is going to seize that Social Security number and file a fraudulent return, you need to know that that's a fraudulent return. If you're simply matching it against are you suggesting that because the dollar amounts would vary, that would okay.
Right.
Yeah, well,
the person perpetrating the fraud really doesn't know what's in the other person's W-2.
They just start making up a
They're
Social
just
Security
making
number.
up the numbers. The other thing that's related to this is another recommendation we have. You know, for 54 million Americans that are enrolled in Medicare, their Social Security numbers right on their Medicare card.
Yeah,
And
not good.
Not good.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask one more question. If we take and actually use old data, by that I mean old numbers, this is your employer on that Social Security number, and use the previous tax year, you might actually get at least a bank of those returns that would be incorrect or would not match unless that taxpayer changed their status or changed their address or changed their job. Wouldn't that be a screening technique we could use?
It's a possible screening technique. The trade-off there is, given the number of Americans that change jobs, change home addresses each year, IRS would have millions of false positives with that kind of match. So they really need current information.
I agree, but what I'm saying is at least then you might be down to 20% of those returns that you don't know. I mean, I don't think more than 20% change jobs or change addresses every year.
Yes, and IRS has made real progress with their filter system. So they prevented $24 billion worth of fraud because of filters that do some of what you're talking about right now. The problem is the $6 billion, it's the $5.8 billion of fraud that is still getting out the door.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.